My name is Jessica Lipke, and today I'm going to be discussing the interaction between cognition and nature. So, to begin, I'm going to discuss attention restoration theory. Essentially, it separates attention into two categories: voluntary and involuntary attention. And this is important and it relates to nature because interacting with environments rich with fascinating stimuli like nature, whether that be a park, a playground, a beach, anything like that, it gives directed attention a break, which then implies that after that break in nature, you can perform better on tasks that need that direct attention, especially when comparing it to urban environments that include more loud noises like traffic and car horns. And again, why is this important? There's been an increased reliance on technology and a global trend towards urban living, so there's less time outside, and so using that time in nature to help your cognition is important. So specifically, some studies that I found, the first thing I wanted to point out was green spaces versus blue spaces. Green spaces are things like parks, playgrounds, forests, and trails, and have been studied more compared to blue spaces, which are water spaces, so rivers, oceans, lakes, beaches. Those spaces are beginning to get studied more. But specific studies, the Berman study from 2008, about 40 students were studied. They used a positive and negative affect schedule to track their mood, which was on a Likert scale of 1 to 5. So they were asked their current mood, and then they went on a walk for the same amount of time, either at a park or downtown in a city, and then they were asked to rate their mood after the walk, and then the study showed significant improvements in the mood when not walking in nature versus that downtown area. And something that I found interesting was there wasn't an impact with the seasons, so spring, summer, fall, winter, it was statistically significant improvement in mood in nature. And then a Berman and Schertz study in 2019 looked specifically at green spaces near schools, and that promoted cognitive development in children. And then green spaces near homes promoted self-controlled behaviors for children. And then they also looked at adults in public housing and found that when they were placed in housing with more green space compared to less green space, they showed better attention functioning. And then 3 specific theories were found in the research that I looked through, which is the biophilia theory, which is our ancestors evolved in wild settings and relied on the environment to survive, so there's an innate drive towards nature, which could kind of explain why our cognition improves when we're in nature. And then the stress reduction hypothesis, which again, exposure to nature quickly reduces physiological and psychological stress. And then attention restoration theory, which is that nature replenishes cognitive resources and the ability to concentrate. So what are the specific benefits? Improved attention, better mood, reduced risk of psychiatric disorder, uptick in empathy and cooperation. It can improve working memory, cognition, flexibility, and attention control, and then just overall general happiness, subjective well-being, positive affect, positive social interactions, a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And then green spaces in general, outside of cognition, it improves air quality, it reduces urban heat, it manages stormwater, supports biodiversity, sequesters carbon, cuts noise and light pollution, it can reduce crime rate, it improves community interactions, and strengthens time. And something that I also found interesting, these are all specific benefits of those green spaces. Urban environments can be linked to attention deficit. So not only are green spaces improving, but those urban spaces are declining our cognition. So who benefits? In short, everyone does. There was a study in Denmark where they used satellite data to assess green spaces exposure from birth to 10 and compared that to longitudinal data with almost 1 million residents born between 1985 and 2003. and they found that children living in neighborhoods with green spaces had a reduced risk for psychiatric disorders, specifically mood disorders, depression, schizophrenia, eating disorders, and substance use disorders. And then the Zelinsky study, again, looked at elementary aged kids, and he found that they acted more pro-socially after field trips in nature versus field trips to museums, and that pro-social behavior was towards classmates and strangers. And then walking distance is also an important part of that. So green spaces within walking distance of one's home correlates with better outcomes, specifically for homemakers, elderly, those in lower socioeconomic status groups, and then just people who are typically less active. The closer it is, the more access that they have to those things. So if you don't have access, that can potentially be a problem or not. So those with less green space exposure have a 55% higher risk of developing mental illness, and because of that statistic, I wanted to look into kind of the privilege of being able to be in an area with green space. And so the research I found saw that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are 3 times less likely to live in areas with access to nature, and that problem is specifically in lower income communities of color. And so I'm hypothesizing that yes, the green spaces improve all of these things, but those areas without green space are typically lower income, so those green spaces in turn also probably have more access to other resources such as mental health supports and medical supports. And then low mobility or chronically ill people may not be able to get outside as often, so there are studies that look at nature sounds. Berman found that study participants who listened to nature sounds performed better on cognitive tests versus those who listened to urban sounds, again, like those car horns. And then they've also looked at nature VR experiences, and they suggested that can be a substitute for those with low mobility or chronically ill, and there's plenty of YouTube videos for free that are nature ambiance sounds or VR nature videos for free. So how long, how often? 2 hours is the research I found most of, and that includes older adults, people with chronic health issues. It shows a significantly greater health and well-being. They also looked at how frequently, and the study showed that it's 2 hours for the week. It could be 30 minutes a day for 4 days. It could be 2 hours in one day. It still has that greater health and well-being. So something specifically that you can do outside that kind of connects the other topics is mindfulness. So mindfulness is essentially a moment-to-moment awareness of one's experience without judgment. Benefits of mindfulness are reduced rumination, stress reduction, it boosts the working memory, it increases focus, it has less emotional reactivity, more cognitive flexibility, relationship satisfaction, enhanced self-insight, morality, intuition, and fear modulation, and a lot of other middle prefrontal lobe functions. So specifically mindful walking, I do this with my students where I work, especially when it's nicer outside. So there's a form that you kind of go over with them. Before they go on the walk, you practice box breathing, and then as you're walking, you kind of think about how your body feels when you're walking. Like even things like how your feet feel in your shoes. Are you wearing shoes? Are you in pain? Are you having any stiffness? Just your emotions. And to begin the mindfulness walk, you take deep breaths and walk at a slower pace than usual, and then you just take notice of how your body's feeling when you take those steps. You pay attention to your senses, and then you appreciate the surroundings. So that is specifically something you can do in nature. And then those are my references.